Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever been in a room where you felt like a ghost, your talents and potential completely overlooked? It's a universal sting, that feeling of being profoundly misjudged. Society relentlessly teaches us that billionaires and titans of industry are the ones who shape the world, that their authority is absolute. But I'm here to share a powerful secret with you. True dominance isn't always loud and flashy. Sometimes it's a quiet legacy, a hidden history just waiting for the perfect moment to change the game forever. This is the unbelievable story of a man who thought he had it all, a powerful CEO named Howard Vaughn. He was a quintessential rich boss, a man so driven by the need to secure his massive inheritance that he made a shocking, cold-blooded decision. He married his quiet, unassuming assistant as part of a temporary business contract. He saw Helen Harrison as a simple solution, a pawn in his game. But he was about to learn a lesson that would shatter his entire reality, because the rich boss who married his assistant to inherit was about to find out that her secret bloodline actually made her his superior. What you're about to see is a story that proves that destiny has a wicked sense of humor, and that a person's true power isn't found in a skyscraper office, but in the history they carry within them. We're diving deep into a world of secrets, quiet dignity, and a plot twist so profound it will leave you breathless. This isn't just a story about wealth, it's a story about worth, and the shocking discovery that the person you underestimate the most might just be the one holding all the cards. So get ready for a roller coaster of emotions. We'll feel the sting of injustice as a good woman is humiliated. We'll see the first sparks of a love story that defies all logic, and we will witness the satisfying, jaw-dropping moment of redemption when the truth is finally revealed. This is a story for anyone who has ever dreamed of a great reversal, for anyone who believes that in the end, character is the only destiny that truly matters. The journey from a loveless marriage of convenience to an unbreakable bond starts right now. Before we dive into this incredible journey, do me a huge favor and let us know which beautiful city you're watching from in the comments below. We absolutely love seeing how far our stories manage to travel. And if you believe that fate has a funny way of setting things right, go ahead and hit that like button. Make sure you're following the channel so you don't miss a single moment of what's coming. And please, share this video with someone who you think will be touched by this amazing story. Well, isn't it just the story of the age? A titan of industry, a veritable rich boss like Howard Vaughn, cornered by the one thing his money couldn't easily buy: his own inheritance. The old man had a flair for the dramatic, you see, leaving a little clause in his will that required Howard to be married. It was a move designed to teach him a lesson about life, but all it really did was force his hand into a calculated, almost cynical marriage of convenience. And who did he pick for this grand performance? None other than his quiet, almost invisible assistant, Helen Harrison. She was the perfect candidate, or so he thought. No messy family, no social standing to complicate things, and a demeanor so unassuming she could blend into the wallpaper. He saw her as a simple solution, a temporary pawn in a game only he was playing. This wasn't meant to be a love story, it was a transaction, a 6-month contract that would secure his birthright. Little did he know, the concept of destiny has a funny way of laughing at the plans of powerful men, especially those who believe themselves to be entirely superior in every way. The deal was struck in his sterile, top-floor office, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy he owned. He laid out the terms with the detached precision of a surgeon, completely oblivious to the woman sitting opposite him. To him, she was just Helen, his efficient assistant. He never once considered that she might possess a secret identity, a history that ran deeper and truer than his own manufactured legacy. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. He was buying a wife, but she already owned the kingdom. You have to wonder what was going through her mind. Agreeing to a sham marriage with a man who barely saw her as a person. But Helen Harrison had her own reasons, ghost from an orphan past that whispered of survival and quiet resilience. She was far from the simple girl Howard perceived. Within her flowed a bloodline so ancient and powerful, it had been all but forgotten by the world. This hidden lineage was her greatest secret, a source of hidden power she herself was only vaguely aware of. The ceremony, if you could call it that, was as emotional as a corporate merger. 2 witnesses, a lawyer, and the hollow echo of vows that meant nothing. Howard Vaughn got what he wanted: a wife on paper, the key to his inheritance. He looked at Helen, standing there in a simple dress, and felt a flicker of something, that affection, but the satisfaction of a problem solved. He was now one step closer to securing the Vaughn empire, completely unaware that his new bride was, by every measure of history and birthright, his superior. And so the papers were signed, and the charade began. He led her into his world of cold luxury, a world where she was meant to be a silent partner, a footnote in his grand story. But a plot twist was already in motion, a silent current pulling them toward an unavoidable truth. The stage was set, the players in their places, but the script was about to be rewritten by a history he never knew existed. He thought he was in control, but his first act as a married man would be to lay down the rules for the woman who held all the real power. The ink on the marriage license was barely dry when Howard Vaughn summoned Helen to his study. It wasn't a husband calling for his wife, it was the rich boss calling for his assistant. He sat behind a desk the size of a small boat, a silent declaration of his power. "Let's be clear about the terms of this arrangement," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. This wasn't to be a partnership, it was an extended employment contract, and he was making sure she understood her place in the hierarchy. This marriage of convenience had rules, and they were all his. He slid a leather-bound folder across the polished wood. Inside was a list of duties and expectations, none of which resembled a love story. She was to manage the household staff, attend public functions on his arm, and most importantly, remain invisible in his private life. "You are here to fulfill a role, Helen," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "Once the inheritance is secured, this contract is terminated." He made it painfully clear that her presence was temporary, a means to an end, and she shouldn't dare to dream of anything more. It was a masterclass in condescension, a way to remind her of the vast gulf between them. He felt it was necessary to assert his position as the superior figure in this charade. He detailed separate wings of the mansion, separate social schedules, and a strict code of conduct. Every rule was a subtle knife, designed to keep her in the box of employee. It was a calculated effort to ensure she never forgot where she came from, and how benevolent he was for even letting her step into his world, however briefly. The whole situation was designed to be quietly humiliated for her. He spoke of his family's bloodline and the image they had to maintain, as if she were a potential stain on their pristine legacy. It was an emotional bulldozer of a conversation, meant to flatten any hope she might have had. He was setting the stage, ensuring that when the time came to discard her, it would be as simple as firing an underperforming staff member. There was no room for sentiment, no space for connection. It was business, and Howard Vaughn was always in control of his business dealings, or so he believed. Helen listened, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She didn't argue or flinch. She simply absorbed every cold, cutting word. This was the man she had married, a fortress of pride and arrogance. She knew this wouldn't be easy, but her own destiny was a path she had to walk, even if it meant enduring this temporary degradation. Her secret identity remained tucked away, a quiet hum of hidden power beneath her serene exterior. He saw an assistant she knew she was so much more. As he finished his litany of rules, he dismissed her with a curt nod. "That will be all," he said, the words he'd used 1,000 times in the office. He turned back to his work, considering the matter settled. He had put her in her place, established his dominance, and secured the first phase of his plan. He didn't give her a second thought as she left the room. But how would this carefully constructed hierarchy hold up when faced with the scorn of his arrogant family, who were far less subtle in their cruelty? The first family dinner was less of a welcome and more of a trial by fire. The Vaughns were old money, a clan that dripped with arrogance and an unshakable belief that their bloodline made them superior to everyone else on the planet. They circled Helen like sharks, their smiles sharp and their questions dripping with venom. To them, she wasn't a person, she was a scandal, a low-level assistant who had somehow tricked their golden boy, the rich boss Howard Vaughn, into a marriage of convenience. His mother, Beatrice, was the worst. She looked Helen up and down, her gaze lingering on the simple dress Helen wore. "Tell me, dear," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, "what is it you do exactly?" The question hung in the air, a clear implication that whatever it was insignificant. They wanted to see her crumble, to expose her as the gold digger they believed her to be. Every word was a calculated attempt to make her feel humiliated, to remind her that she didn't belong in their world and never would. Yet Helen didn't break. She met their scorn not with anger or fear, but with a quiet, unshakable dignity. She answered their barbed questions with simple, honest grace. She didn't try to impress them or fight back. Instead, she radiated a calm that seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. This wasn't weakness, it was a form of hidden power they couldn't comprehend. It was the strength of someone who had faced far worse than a few snobbish relatives and knew her own worth, regardless of their validation. Howard watched from the sidelines, a silent observer of the spectacle. He had expected her to be overwhelmed, to perhaps even falter, which would have reinforced his view of her as fragile and dependent. But her composure was a surprise to him. He saw his family's cruelty, and for the first time, a flicker of something uncomfortable stirred within him. This wasn't part of the plan. Her resilience was an unforeseen variable in his perfectly calculated world, a minor plot twist in the otherwise straightforward narrative of securing his inheritance. She endured their insults about her background, their snide remarks about her being an orphan, and their not-so-subtle hints that she was only after the family fortune. The entire evening was an incredibly emotional ordeal, designed to break her spirit. But as she thanked them for the dinner, her voice steady and her eyes clear, she had subtly won a battle they didn't even know they were fighting. She wasn't just surviving, she was proving that true class had nothing to do with money or a family name. The family was left bewildered, their attacks having bounced off an invisible shield. They had intended to expose a commoner, but instead found themselves facing an enigma. Helen's quiet strength was a mystery, a silent challenge to their entire worldview. Howard drove her home in a tense silence, his mind replaying the evening's events. He was starting to realize that the simple assistant he thought he knew might be more complex than he imagined. And soon, at a high-stakes board meeting, that complexity would move from the dining room to the boardroom. It was a crisis. The quarterly board meeting had gone south, and Howard's ambitious new tech venture, his pet project, was on the verge of collapse. The numbers weren't adding up, a critical flaw in the logistics had been overlooked, and his team of highly paid experts was stumped. As the rich boss, the pressure was entirely on him, and he could feel the vultures on the board circling, ready to dismantle his vision. The failure would not only be a financial blow, but a direct threat to the smooth transfer of his inheritance. Helen was in the room for one reason, only to take notes. She was the silent assistant, a piece of the furniture as far as anyone else was concerned. She sat in a corner, dutifully transcribing the escalating argument, her presence completely ignored by the powerful men and women in the room. They spoke in complex jargon, throwing around figures and projections, but they were all missing the forest for the trees. They were so focused on the complicated data that they couldn't see the simple human element they had overlooked. Then, during a tense pause, Helen cleared her throat. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, her voice soft but clear, causing every head to turn. The surprise in the room was palpable. The assistant was speaking. Perhaps, she continued, the issue isn't the algorithm. It's the delivery route. You're routing through a region known for frequent labor strikes, which aren't reflected in the quarterly data, but are common knowledge to the locals. It was a simple, intelligent observation, born from practicality rather than a spreadsheet. A moment of stunned silence followed. The project manager frantically typed on his laptop, his eyes widening as he cross-referenced news archives. She was right. It was so obvious, yet every single superior mind in that room had missed it. Howard felt a strange mix of emotions. He was annoyed that his assistant had publicly pointed out a flaw his team had missed, a minor dent in his authority. But beneath the annoyance, he was intrigued. Where did that come from? It was a display of a hidden power he never suspected she possessed, a sharp, analytical mind. The solution was implemented, the project was saved, and the board was placated. Howard was praised for his team's quick thinking, but he knew the credit belonged to the one person no one would thank. The incident was a significant plot twist in their dynamic. He had hired her to be a silent, compliant figure in his marriage of convenience, but she had just proven she had a mind that could rival his own. This wasn't the simple girl he thought had married. As they left the meeting, the usual distance between them felt different. It was charged with a new, unspoken tension. He had seen a glimpse behind the curtain of her secret identity, and it left him puzzled. He was the boss, the one with the answers, yet she had saved him. The power dynamic had shifted, if only for a moment, and he found himself wondering what other secrets she was hiding. His confusion was only set to deepen, especially when his manipulative exfiancy decided to make an appearance. The annual charity gala was the pinnacle of the social season, a glittering affair where fortunes were pledged and reputations were made or broken. It was the perfect stage for Howard's exfiancy, a venomous socialite named Clara, to strike. She saw Helen, the former assistant, on the arm of the rich boss and saw her chance. Clara's goal was simple: to publicly prove that Helen was nothing more than a commoner, unfit to stand by Howard's side, and to make her feel utterly humiliated in front of everyone who mattered. Clara cornered Helen near the champagne fountain, her voice loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. And just so surprised Howard chose someone so simple, she said, dripping with false sympathy. It must be terribly overwhelming for you. Do you even know which fork to use? The insult was childish but effective, drawing snickers from Clara's clique. They expected Helen to blush, to stammer, to run away in tears. They were ready for the drama, for the confirmation that she was out of her depth in their superior world. But Helen didn't take the bait. Instead of reacting to Clara, she noticed a young waiter who had just dropped a tray of glasses, his face pale with panic. While Clara and her friends sneered at the poor boy, Helen excused herself, knelt down, and helped the waiter pick up the broken glass. "It's okay," she whispered to him, her voice full of genuine kindness. "Accidents happen to everyone." This simple act of compassion, this moment of treating a staff member like a human being, was a radical display in a room full of people who saw them as invisible. What Helen didn't know was that Mr. Abernathy, a notoriously shrewd and crucial investor Howard had been courting for months, was watching the entire exchange. Abernathy, a man who had built his empire from nothing, valued character above all else. He had seen Clara's cruelty and then Helen's quiet act of grace. He was not impressed by the shallow performance of the elite. He was moved by an authentic display of hidden power, the power of empathy. This was no simple love story, but it was a story of character. Later that evening, Mr. Abernathy approached Howard, completely ignoring the preening Clara. "Your wife, Vaughn," he said with a nod of approval. "She has true quality. You don't find that often." With that, he shook Howard's hand and pledged his support for Howard's new venture, a deal worth millions. It was a stunning surprise, a complete reversal of what Clara had intended. Her attempt to humiliate Helen had backfired spectacularly, securing a victory for the very woman she tried to destroy. This plot twist was not something Howard had anticipated. Howard was left speechless. He had brought Helen as a prop for his marriage of convenience, a placeholder to secure his inheritance. Yet, her quiet, unassuming nature, the very thing he saw as a weakness, had just achieved something his wealth and power could not. He looked at Helen across the room, who was now chatting easily with the event staff, and felt a profound sense of confusion. Who was this woman? Her simple background seemed to hide a strength and integrity that his world sorely lacked. He had to know more. Howard Vaughn was a man who hated puzzles he couldn't solve. And Helen, his quiet wife from the marriage of convenience, was becoming the most complex puzzle of all. Her composure under fire from his family, her sharp intellect in the boardroom, her disarming kindness at the gallon of it, fit the simple profile of the assistant he had hired. He was a rich boss used to having all the information, to understanding every angle. Her secret identity, if she had one, was a loose thread he needed to pull. Driven by a mix of suspicion and a curiosity he wouldn't admit to, he did what powerful men do. He hired the best private investigator money could buy. "I want to know everything," Howard commanded. Her past, her family, every school, every job. Dig deep. He expected to uncover something, a hidden agenda, a scandalous secret, perhaps a connection to a rival. He needed an explanation for the hidden power she seemed to wield without even trying, a power that was making him question his own superior judgment. The investigator was thorough, a ghost who sifted through the ashes of Helen's past. He traced her life back from her employment at Vaughn Industries to a series of unremarkable jobs, a modest state university scholarship, and before that, a string of foster homes. The report that landed on Howard's desk a week later was disappointingly thin. The official story was as simple as it gets: Helen Harrison was an orphan, a ward of the state with no known bloodline to speak of. No family, no connections, no skeletons in the closet. It made no sense. The report painted a picture of a lonely, unremarkable life, one that should have produced a person who was either timid or bitter. It didn't explain the quiet confidence, the unshakable dignity, the intelligent mind. The investigation was a dead end, a surprise in its utter lack of drama. He had paid a small fortune only to be told what he already knew: she was, on paper, a nobody. This result was an emotional letdown, leaving him more confused than before. This simple, official history only deepened the mystery. If she wasn't hiding a scandalous past, then what was the source of her strength? He stared at the report, at the black and white facts that failed to capture the woman he saw every day. It felt like a deliberate plot twist orchestrated by fate, designed to mock his attempts to understand her through logic and data. He had tried to dissect her like a business problem, but she remained an enigma. His investigation had failed to reveal her secret. Frustrated, Howard tossed the file aside. He had learned nothing, yet everything had changed. The lack of a secret was, in itself, the most intriguing secret of all. He was back at square one, forced to observe her, to try and understand the woman herself, not just her history. And as he stewed in his confusion, Helen, completely unaware of his snooping, was about to make a discovery of her own, one that would connect her to a past far grander than any private investigator could ever uncover. The vast mansion Howard called home often felt less like a house and more like a museum, cold and impersonal. To escape the oppressive silence, Helen often found refuge in the one room that felt alive: the two-story library. It was a sanctuary filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a place where history slept on the shelves. One rainy afternoon, while exploring a dusty, forgotten corner, her hand brushed against a heavy velvet curtain, revealing a section of the wall she'd never seen before. Her curiosity piqued by this surprise. Behind the curtain was a hidden alcove, and in it hung a single portrait, ancient and overlooked. It depicted a noble woman, her posture proud, her eyes holding a mixture of fierce intelligence and gentle sorrow. She was beautiful, but it wasn't her beauty that captivated Helen. It was the unnerving feeling of familiarity, a deep and emotional pull she couldn't explain. It felt like looking at a reflection of her own soul, a connection that transcended time itself. Who was this woman? She felt an immediate, almost spiritual kinship with the figure in the painting. The woman's face seemed to hold a story of strength, of enduring hardship with Gracian narrative that resonated with Helen's own quiet life. There was no nameplate on the frame, no clue to her identity. She was a ghost in the Vaughn family home, a secret identity lost to time. Helen felt a powerful urge to know more, a sense that this woman's story was somehow intertwined with her own destiny. This was more than just an old painting, it was a mirror. The noble woman possessed a look of quiet authority, a natural sense of being superior, not through arrogance, but through innate character. It was the same quality that others sometimes saw in Helen, the hidden power that so confused a rich boss like Howard. Staring at the portrait, Helen felt a piece of her own puzzle click into place, even though she didn't yet understand the full picture. The connection to this mysterious bloodline felt profound. She spent hours in that alcove, returning day after day, as if drawing strength from the silent noblewoman. The portrait became her secret confidant in the cold, transactional world of her marriage of convenience. It was a silent testament to a different kind of power, one that wasn't built on wealth or status. It was a power of spirit, a resilience that echoed in Helen's own heart. This discovery felt like the beginning of a plot twist in her own life story. While Helen was forging this mystical connection with the past, Howard was about to be brought crashing down into the present. A sudden aggressive fever would soon take hold of him, rendering the powerful CEO utterly helpless. He would be forced into a position of vulnerability he had never experienced before, dependent on the care of the very woman he considered his subordinate. The fortress he had built around himself was about to be breached, not by a business rival, but by a simple flu. It started with a shiver, then a raging fever that left the formidable Howard Vaughn delirious and weak. The invincible rich boss, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, was reduced to a helpless figure, confined to his bed. His staff was competent but clinical, and his family was nowhere to be found. It was Helen, the woman he treated as little more than a temporary assistant, who stayed by his side, her presence a quiet, constant comfort in the disorienting haze of his illness. She wasn't just following orders, she cared for him with a gentle, unwavering patience. She bathed his forehead with cool cloths, brewed him soothing teas from memory, and spoke to him in a soft, calming voice when his fevered dreams turned dark. In his moments of brief lucidity, he saw her not as the employee from his marriage of convenience, but as a person, a woman whose kindness was a balm to his aching body and, unexpectedly, his lonely soul. It was a truly emotional experience for him. This was a side of her he had never seen, a profound display of empathy that his cold, transactional world had no place for. Her touch was gentle, her concern was genuine. There was no agenda, no calculation, it was pure, unadorned compassion. This act of grace was a surprise that chipped away at the icy walls he had built around his heart. He was completely vulnerable, and she met his weakness not with disdain or opportunism, but with a strength of character that was its own form of hidden power. For the first time, he saw past the role he had assigned her. He saw Helen Harrison, the woman. He noticed the weary kindness in her eyes, the quiet determination in her hands, and the simple grace in her movements. He was supposed to be the superior one in their arrangement, but as she cared for him, their roles felt strangely reversed. She held all the power in that room, of power to comfort, to heal, to soothe. And for the first time, the idea of a love story didn't seem so absurd. As the fever broke and his strength slowly returned, the dynamic between them had irrevocably shifted. The silence was no longer tense and awkward, but filled with a new, unspoken understanding. He had been forced to rely on her, to accept her help, and in doing so, he had allowed a connection to form. The carefully crafted lines of their contract had blurred. He was starting to see her true worth, a worth that had nothing to do with securing his inheritance or her secret identity. He had seen her character laid bare, and it was a revelation. His perception of her as a simple pawn was shattered, replaced by a grudging, growing respect. This unexpected intimacy was a plot twist he could never have predicted. As he recovered, he started to listen more, to observe. And what he would soon overhear, a conversation between his own relatives, would ignite a protective instinct he never knew he possessed, forcing him to question who the real villains in his story were. Howard was on the mend, still weak but clear-headed enough to move about the quiet mansion. It was during one of these quiet moments, standing just out of sight in the grand hallway, that he overheard voices from the drawing room. It was his mother, Beatrice, and his arrogant cousin, speaking in hushed conspiratorial tones. They were discussing him, his inheritance, and to his growing anger, the fate of his wife, Helen. Their words were cold, cruel, and utterly dismissive. Once Howard has the company locked down, we'll get rid of the little assistant, his cousin sneered. A quick annulment, a small payoff. She'll be back in whatever gutter she crawled out of before she knows it. Beatrice agreed, adding, "It's for the best. We can't have someone with no bloodline tainting the family name permanently." They spoke of Helen as if she were a disposable object, a tool to be used and then discarded without a second thought, a final act to leave her humiliated. A hot, unfamiliar anger surged through Howard. A month ago, he might have agreed with their cold logic. He himself had drafted the terms of their marriage of convenience with a similar detachment. But hearing these words now, after Helen had cared for him with such genuine kindness, felt like a betrayal. He felt a surprisingly fierce, protective instinct rise within him. The thought of his family hurting her, of casting her aside so callously, was suddenly unbearable. It was a raw and emotional reaction. This was a major plot twist in his own character arc. The rich boss who saw people as assets and liabilities was suddenly feeling a loyalty that defied logic. He was supposed to be the superior one, the one in control, but his family's plotting revealed their own moral bankruptcy. He realized with a jolt that Helen's quiet dignity was worth more than his family's entire pretentious legacy. She, the orphan, had more class and integrity than any of them. He stayed hidden, listening to them laugh about her simplicity, her naivety. They had no idea of the hidden power she possessed, the strength of character that he had been blind to for so long. They saw a temporary problem, but he was beginning to see a woman he deeply respected. This wasn't about the contract anymore. This was about right and wrong. It was a moment of surprise clarity for him, a turning point in his manufactured love story. The conversation solidified, a change that had been slowly taking root in his heart. His duty was no longer just to his family's empire, but to the woman who had shown him what decency looked like. He knew he had to protect her from their schemes. He walked away before they could see him, his mind racing. He had to find a way to secure her future, to shield her from the vipers in his own family. But a far greater revelation was looming, one hidden in the legal jargon of the very will that started it all. The day had come for the final reading of the will, the formal transfer of power. Howard, with his new wife by his side, sat confidently in the lawyer's office, ready to assume full control of his inheritance. His family was practically buzzing with anticipation, already planning how to spend the vast fortune, and of course, how to dismiss the temporary Mrs. Vaughn. They believed this was the final act, the culmination of their long-held belief that their bloodline made them superior rulers of their empire. But Mr. Fairfield, the elderly family lawyer, cleared his throat, his expression uncharacteristically grave. "There is one final matter," he announced, pulling out a separate, wax-sealed document. "A hidden codicil, added by your grandfather shortly before his death." He was a great historian of this family's legacy. A confused silence fell over the room. This wasn't part of the script. This was an unexpected surprise that immediately set everyone on edge. The lawyer began to read. The codicil was a bombshell, a plot twist of epic proportions. It stated that while the Vaughn family had managed the empire for generations, true ownership and ultimate authority did not belong to them. It belonged by ancient law and the founder's original decree only to a direct descendant of the estate's original founding familia family everyone believed had died out over a century ago. Without a legitimate heir from this founding bloodline, the entire Vaughn fortune would be dissolved and donated to charity. Chaos erupted. Howard's mother shrieked. His cousin cursed. They were not the true owners. After all this time, their control was nothing but a stewardship. It was the ultimate state of being humiliated. All their pride, their arrogance, their belief in their own super-messiahate was all built on a lie. Howard himself was stunned, his mind reeling. The very foundation of his identity, of his power as a rich boss, had just crumbled into dust. Destiny had played a cruel joke. The codicil was a ghost from the past, a piece of a secret identity tied to the very land and company they stood on. The lawyer explained that Howard's grandfather had spent years searching for a living heir, but the trail had gone cold. Now the burden of proof was on them. If they couldn't find a direct descendant of this long-lost family, they would lose everything. The marriage of convenience suddenly seemed trivial in the face of utter ruin. Howard looked over at Helen, who sat quietly amidst the pandemonium, her expression calm as ever. She was an outsider to this drama, a simple assistant caught in the implosion of a dynasty. Or was she? The irony was staggering. He had married her to secure an inheritance that wasn't even truly his. As the family descended into panic and accusations, Helen was about to go through her own modest belongings, where a small forgotten object held the key to this entire impossible puzzle. In the midst of the Vaughn family's existential crisis, Helen sought solace in the quiet of her own room. The news about the inheritance was a distant storm that didn't seem to concern her directly. Her contract with the rich boss would soon be over, and she would move on. With this in mind, she began sorting through her few personal belongings, a small box of things she had carried with her from one foster home to another. It was a meager collection, the sum total of her past. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in a piece of faded silk, was her grandmother's locket. It was the only thing she had left of her family, a tarnished silver oval she had treasured since she was a child. She rarely opened it. The memories it contained were often too emotional to bear. But today, something compelled her. With a soft click, she opened the tiny doors, preparing to see the familiar faded photo of her grandmother. But there was another side, one she hadn't looked at in years. On the other side was a miniature portrait, exquisitely painted, of a woman she had never known. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the face from the library. The same noble woman, the same intelligent eyes, the same quiet strength. It was an impossible surprise, a shocking connection between her own forgotten bloodline and the hidden history of the Vaughn mansion. The woman in the locket and the woman in the secret portrait were one and the same. Suddenly, it all started to make sense, the unexplainable connection she felt, the sense of belonging in that library, the feeling that she had seen that face before. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a sign, a piece of her secret identity revealing itself. The locket was more than a keepsake, it was a key. A plot twist delivered not by lawyers in a stuffy office, but by a ghost in a piece of jewelry. The hidden power in her lineage was starting to surface. She snapped the locket shut, her heart pounding. What did this mean? The Vaughns were desperately searching for an heir to a long-lost founding family, and she was holding a portrait of a woman who almost certainly belonged to that era, a woman who looked so much like her. Could it be possible? Was her own anonymous history, The life of a simple assistant, a lie? Was her destiny something far grander and more complicated than she had ever imagined? She knew she had to show someone, but who? Trusting Howard felt like a risk. Their marriage of convenience was a business deal, and this was something deeply personal. Yet at the same time, he was the one being torn apart by this very mystery. Meanwhile, Howard himself was going through his own transformation, a journey from a superior boss to a man starting to fall in love, making the impending end of their contract a source of private dread. The crisis over the inheritance had stripped away Howard's usual arrogance, leaving him raw and reflective. In the ensuing chaos, he found himself watching Helen, not as an assistant or a contractual wife, but as the one calm center in his collapsing world. He saw how she moved with quiet purpose, untroubled by the potential loss of a fortune she had never desired. Her strength wasn't tied to money or status, it was innate, a core of integrity that made his own world seem shallow and fragile in comparison. He was, much to his own surprise, falling in love. It wasn't a sudden dramatic passion, but a slow, dawning realization. It was in the way she listened, the way she showed kindness to the staff, the way her quiet presence brought a sense of peace to the cavernous emotional wreck of his life. He was starting to see the real woman, and he realized with a jolt that her inner worth, her character, was a treasure far greater than the entire Vaughn empire. This was the ultimate plot twist for a man who had always measured value in dollars. The end of their marriage of convenience was looming, a date circled on a calendar in his office. A few months ago, he had looked forward to it as a simple business conclusion. Now he dreaded it with every fiber of his being. The thought of letting her go, of sending her away after his family's mess was sorted, felt like an impossible loss. Their sham marriage was unexpectedly turning into the most real and meaningful love story of his life, even if she was completely unaware of his feelings. He found himself trying to connect with her, asking about her day, sharing a quiet cup of tea in the evening. He was no longer the rich boss issuing orders, but a man trying to bridge the gap he himself had created. He wanted to know her, to understand the source of her hidden power. He was no longer the superior figure in their dynamic in matters of the heart and character. He felt like a novice, humbled by her simple grace. It was a slow, painful, but necessary path to his own redemption. He knew he had treated her poorly, that he had used her. The guilt was a heavy weight. How could he ever tell her how he felt, knowing that their entire relationship was built on a cold, selfish contract? He felt trapped by his own cynical design. His destiny, it seemed, was to realize what he truly wanted only when it was about to be taken away. He was in love with a woman who had every reason to walk away from him and never look back. But fate had one more card to play. As Howard wrestled with his newfound emotions, a historian, hired to verify the will's codicil and search for any historical clues about the founding family's bloodline, was about to arrive at the mansion. And that historian was about to cross paths with Helen and the small, tarnished locket that held the key to everything, changing their lives forever. A renowned historian, a meticulous man named Professor Alistair Finch, was brought in to analyze the codicil and the Vaughn family's history. He was their last hope. He spent days poring over ancient maps and dusty ledgers in the mansion's library, searching for any clue about the original founding family's bloodline. The Vaughns followed his progress with desperate hope, believing he was the key to saving their inheritance from dissolving into nothing. They saw him as their savior. Helen, drawn to the library as always, was quietly reading in her corner when the professor let out a frustrated sigh. She approached him cautiously. "Is everything all right, Professor?" she asked. He explained his predicament, how he was searching for a crest, a symbol of the lost family, but all known records had been destroyed in a fire a century ago. It was a dead end. Feeling an inexplicable impulse, a nudge from destiny, Helen opened her hand. Would it, by any chance, look something like this? She showed him the locket. Alistair Finch, a man who had dedicated his life to history, froze. His eyes widened, and he carefully took the small silver oval from her hand as if it were the crown jewels. On the back, faint and worn with time, was an engraving, a stylized tree entwined with a serpent. He recognized it instantly from a single surviving sketch he had once seen in a private collection. It was the crest of the Devereux family, the original founders of the entire estate. The surprise was so profound he was momentarily speechless. "My dear girl," he finally breathed, his voice trembling with emotional excitement. "Where did you get this?" Helen explained it was her grandmother's, the only heirloom she had. The professor looked from the locket to Helen's face, truly seeing her for the first time. He saw the resemblance to the forgotten portrait hanging in the alcove, a portrait he had dismissed as an irrelevant piece of decor. A monumental plot twist was unfolding right before his eyes. The secret identity he was searching for wasn't in a book, it was standing right in front of him. This was it. The key. The hidden power of a simple object. A connection to a past that everyone thought was dead and buried. The historian, a man of facts and figures, was witnessing a miracle. The search was over. The heir the Vaughns were so desperately seeking, the person with a superior claim to everything they owned, was not some distant, unknown figure. It was the quiet assistant the rich boss had married out of pure convenience. The professor knew what this meant. The implications were staggering. This discovery would not save the Vaughn family, it would dethrone them. He immediately requested official genealogical records be brought forth for comparison, a final step to confirm what he already knew in his heart to be true. The truth, buried for over a century, was about to be unearthed, and it would change everything, especially for Howard and the woman he was just beginning to love. The arrival of the official genealogist and the sealed, archaic records felt like the prelude to a verdict. The air in the library was thick with tension. Howard, his family, the historian, and Helen were all present. It was a strange mix of hope and dread. The Vaughns were praying for a miracle, a distant cousin, anyone from the Devereux bloodline who could be controlled or bought out. They still hadn't grasped the true nature of the plot twist that was about to detonate in their lives. The genealogist worked with quiet efficiency, unrolling brittle scrolls and comparing ancient birth records to the information provided by the historian, which all pointed back to Helen's locket and the portrait. He traced the Devereux line from the 18th century forward. He pointed to a break in the lineage, a daughter who was disowned for marrying a commoner, a woman who was scrubbed from the family history. This daughter, he explained, had a child, and that child had a child, and so on, down through the generations. The final connection was made with a quiet, dramatic finality. The genealogist pointed to the last name on the chart, a woman who died young, leaving behind a single orphan daughter. That daughter's name was Helen Harrison. The room fell into a dead silence. The proof was undeniable, the records impeccable. Helen, the unassuming assistant, the orphan with no history, was the last living heir of the Devereux family. The surprise was so immense, it felt like the world had tilted on its axis. It was all there in black and white. Her secret identity was revealed not through espionage or a grand confession, but through the dry, irrefutable facts of history. She was the sole inheritor of the very inheritance Howard had married her to obtain for himself. All the scorn she had endured, all the moments she was made to feel humiliated for her lack of pedigree, was all a cosmic joke. She didn't just have a bloodline, she had the bloodline. An emotional shockwave ripped through the Vaughn family. Beatrice looked as if she might faint. Their entire identity, their belief that they were superior, was a complete and utter sham. They were caretakers, glorified tenants in a house that belonged to the woman they had treated with such contempt. Howard simply stared at Helen, his mind struggling to process the revelation. The woman he was falling in love with, the woman he sought to protect, didn't need his protection at all. This was the ultimate reversal of fortune, the final act of destiny. The hidden power that everyone had sensed in Helen was not just her character, it was her birthright. The quiet dignity, the inner strength, it was the legacy of her ancestors flowing through her veins. The legal and social ramifications were about to come crashing down, and the true power dynamic, so long inverted, was about to be set right. The truth had been revealed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The lawyer's declaration echoed in the stunned silence of the room, each word a hammer blow to the Vaughn dynasty. According to the founder's original charter, reinforced by the codicil, full and absolute authority over Vaughn Industries, the estate, and all associated assets reverts to the direct heir of the Devereaux bloodline. He paused, looking directly at Helen. That heir is you, Mrs. Vaughn. Or I should say, Ms. Devereaux. The truth was out, stark and irrefutable. Helen was not just an heiress entitled to a piece of the pie, she was the whole damn bakery. She was the ultimate authority, the true rich boss. By law and birthright, Howard's position as CEO, his family's board seats, their very right to live in the mansionette, was all subject to her will. The superior family who had looked down on her were now, in a spectacular plot twist, her dependents. The power hadn't just shifted, it had undergone a tectonic upheaval. The irony was crushing. Howard had orchestrated a marriage of convenience with the one woman on earth who could strip him of everything he had. His carefully laid plans, his arrogant maneuvering for his inheritance, had all been a fool's errand. He had been playing checkers while destiny was playing a game of chess he couldn't even comprehend. The woman he once saw as his lowly assistant now held his entire world in the palm of her hand. To be humiliated was an understatement. His entire reality had been dismantled. The Vaughn family reacted with predictable ugliness, a flurry of disbelief, anger, and pathetic last-ditch denials. But the legal documents were ironclad. They were powerless. All eyes turned to Helen, the quiet center of the hurricane. What would she do? Would she exact revenge? Would she throw them out into the street, just as they had planned to do to her? Her secret identity was now public, and with it came a hidden power that was absolute. The entire room held its breath, waiting for her first command. It was a moment of profound and emotional intensity. Helen looked at the greedy, terrified faces of the Vaughns, and then she looked at Howard. He wasn't pleading or trying to negotiate. He simply looked at her with an expression of deep, profound regret. He saw not just the heiress, but the woman he had wronged, the woman he now loved. The love story that had begun to blossom in his heart was now faced with the ultimate test. He had spent his whole life chasing power, only to discover that true power lay in the character of the person you least expect. Her superiority was never in question, it just wasn't the kind that could be bought or inherited through a name like Vaughn. As everyone waited for her judgment, for her to claim her throne, Howard knew what he had to do. It wasn't about saving his fortune anymore. It was about saving his soul. A public reversal, a final act of redemption, was the only path forward. In front of the lawyers, his broken family, and the woman who now owned his world, Howard Vaughn did the last thing anyone expected. He stood up, walked over to Helen, and sank to one knee. It was a gesture of complete and utter surrender, a stunning public reversal that silenced the room. This wasn't a tactic, it was an act of profound redemption. The rich boss was humbling himself before the assistant he had so grievously misjudged, in an emotional moment of pure sincerity. "I don't want the Vaughn legacy," he said, his voice clear and steady, though filled with regret. "It's built on arrogance and lies. I reject it." He looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "Helen, or Ms. Devereaux, I don't deserve your forgiveness. I used you. I was arrogant and blind. Our marriage of convenience was the most selfish act of my life, but getting to know you has been the most transformative." This was his confession, a final, desperate attempt to salvage the man he wanted to become. I fell in love with you long before I knew about your bloodline, he continued, his voice cracking slightly. I fell in love with your kindness, your strength, your integrity. That is your real hidden power. He didn't ask for the company, the inheritance, or his position. He asked for something far more valuable. I am asking you to forgive me. I don't want to be your subordinate or your CEO. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word, if you'll have me. It was the ultimate plot twist to their love story. Helen looked down at the man kneeling before her, the proud CEO now completely vulnerable. She saw his sincerity, the genuine change in a man who had been transformed by humility. She realized in that moment that his true redemption wasn't about giving up his fortune. It was about recognizing that her worth was never tied to it. He finally understood that she was superior, not because of her secret identity as an heiress, but because of who she was as a person. The surprise of his proposal, so different from their first cold transaction, hung in the air. This was her destiny, not just to reclaim her birthright, but to inspire a profound change in the heart of a man. She had been humiliated, she had been underestimated, but she had never lost herself. Now she had a choice to make. A choice between the past and the future, between revenge and forgiveness, between a lonely empire and a true partnership. She extended her hand, not as a queen to a subject, but as a woman to the man she was also beginning to love. Taking his hand, she pulled him to his feet. Her quiet nod was all the answer he needed. Together, they turned to face their new future, a partnership built not on a contract or a title, but on mutual respect and a hard-won love. The real inheritance was never about the money, it was about the two of them, finding their way back to what truly mattered. What an incredible journey of destiny and redemption. We've just witnessed a story that turns our idea of power completely on its head. We saw Helen Harrison, a woman dismissed and underestimated, rise to her rightful place not just because of a hidden bloodline, but because of her unshakable character. And we saw Howard Vaughn, a man who had everything, realize that his entire fortune was worthless compared to the inner worth of the woman he had tried to use. It's a powerful reminder that true superiority is never about arrogance, but about humility, kindness, and the quiet strength we carry inside. This love story wasn't just about two people finding each other, it was about them finding the best versions of themselves. It reminds us that sometimes, life's greatest plot twists are the ones that lead us back to the truth of who we are. The journey from a cold marriage of convenience to a genuine partnership shows that it's never too late for redemption, and that true destiny is ultimately a matter of character. We genuinely hope this story resonated with you. If this tale of poetic justice and unexpected love touched your heart, please take a moment to show your support by hitting that like button. And now, we would love to hear from you. What was the one moment in this story that impacted you the most? Was it when Helen showed kindness at the gala, or Howard's final humble apology? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We also want to know, did you expect this ending, or were you hoping for a different outcome? Your voice is a vital part of our community, so please, if you haven't already, follow the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the incredible stories we have coming up next. Thank you so much for joining us on this emotional ride. Feel free to explore our older videos for more tales of secrets, romance, and destiny. We are so grateful to have you here. We'll see you in the next story.